Let me paint you a picture. Out there, floating in the dark, between Mars and Jupiter, there's a world that's totally unlike anything we've ever seen. It's called 16 Psyche, and it's not made of rock or ice. It's the raw, exposed metal core of an ancient, long-dead planet. And tucked away inside it is a fortune.
So, just how much of a fortune are we talking about here? The going estimate is around $10 quintillion. Yeah, that's a 10 with 18 zeros after it. I mean, it's a number so ridiculously massive, our brains can't really even process it.
And we're not just talking about cash here. This is enough raw iron, nickel, and precious metals to completely flip our entire global economy on its head. But there's a catch. This incredible prize is locked away in one of the most hostile places you can possibly imagine.
The radiation out there is absolutely lethal. The vacuum is unforgiving. And the kind of psychological isolation you'd experience would break any human mind. It's an impossible job for a person. So how do you claim the biggest prize in history? Well, you don't send a person. You send an army of machines.
So let's get into it. Part 1. The robotic workforce arrives. Imagine this. A fleet of heavy-lift starships just appears in orbit around Psyche, but they're not carrying drills or excavators, not in the traditional sense. They're carrying the miners themselves, an entire workforce custom designed for a world where we just can't survive.
And this, right here, really lays it all out. Everything that makes Psyche a death trap for us is just another engineering problem for a machine. Where we see lethal radiation, they just see a problem that needs some shielding. That unforgiving vacuum, just make the parts easily replaceable. And that soul-crushing isolation that would drive any human completely mad, not an issue when you're a hive mind, all linked up, thinking as one.
And get a load of the sheer scale we're talking about. 10,000 humanoid units, all folded up, packed, and stacked inside a cargo bay, almost like server blades in a giant data center. There's no life support, no living quarters, just pure, high-density storage for an instant workforce.
Now, these are not your run-of-the-mill factory robots, not even close. These are purpose-built for this exact job. They've got this gold foil shielding their circuits from radiation. Their joints use these special dry lubricants so they don't freeze up in the deep space shadows. And maybe the most important part, they're designed from the ground up to be replaceable, expendable parts of one big collective intelligence.
Okay, so how do you even get them on the asteroid? This isn't just a drop, it's more like a carefully choreographed ballet of physics. First, they slide onto this magnetic rail and get released with perfect calculated timing. Then they use these little cold gas thrusters to gently guide themselves down. Since there's almost no gravity, they have to actively fire retro-rockets to slow down, to stop themselves from just smashing into the surface. And then, at the moment of contact, shock absorbers soak up the impact, and powerful electromagnets in their feet clamp them right onto the metal. Click, they're locked in.
You know, you can't just walk on a giant ball of metal with almost no gravity. One wrong step and you're floating off into the void forever. To get around that, they use this clever little algorithm called the mag shuffle. It's this super slow, very deliberate walk where the #1 rule is always have 3 points of contact. 3 magnetic limbs anchored down at all times, no exceptions.
All right, so the workforce is on the ground, they're not floating away. Now the real fun begins. Phase 2, mining the metal world. This is where they start, surgically taking this entire asteroid apart.
And this is where that whole hive mind idea becomes absolutely critical. They don't use big, clumsy explosives. No way. Instead, you've got these teams of robots using high-powered lasers and plasma torches to slice the asteroid's surface into these perfect, manageable blocks. It's like watching 20 bots act as a single surgeon with all their cuts timed down to the millisecond.
But then you gotta ask, how do you move these massive, multi-ton blocks without any trucks? Well, the solution is pretty wild. They basically create a virtual conveyor belt in the sky, creating what one of the sources for this explainer called, and I love this phrase, a river of floating metal flowing across the asteroid.
They call it the 0G bucket brigade. And it is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Robots are literally throwing these massive ore blocks to one another, sometimes across kilometers of terrain. They're just letting Newton's first law do all the heavy lifting. I mean, can you imagine trying to catch a flying ton of metal? For us, that's impossible. But for a perfectly synced network of machines, it's just another math problem to solve. Okay, so they're cutting it up, they're tossing it around, but shipping all that raw rock back to Earth would be crazy inefficient.
The real genius of this operation is that the most valuable work happens right there, on the asteroid. This brings us to part 3, from rock to riches.
So here's how they do it. First, they build a solar furnace using these gigantic mirrors to focus sunlight into one tiny point, hot enough to melt the ore at 1500 degrees Celsius. Then, that molten mix gets spun around in these huge centrifuges, using artificial gravity to separate out the heavy, precious metals from the lighter junk. The pure metal gets cast into neat little ingots, and here's the kicker. Nothing is wasted. Even the leftover slag gets repurposed into bricks to build more infrastructure.
And the quality control here is intense. Every single ingot that comes off the line is laser scanned for purity, and if it's anything less than 99.9% pure, it gets sent right back to be remelted and reprocessed. There is absolutely no room for error. So you've got trillions of dollars in perfect, pure metal ingots. How do you get them home? Not with rockets, that's for sure. Too expensive. Nope, you build a mass driver. Think of it like a giant electromagnetic cannon, a railgun, 2 kilometers long. It just fires these cargo capsules at Mach 20, flinging them on a months-long journey back to Earth, all without using a single drop of fuel.
But here's where the story takes a really fascinating turn. This operation was never designed to just be a temporary mining camp. It was designed to evolve. Which leads us to our next chapter, the self-sustaining colony.
Look, this place is brutal. Bots are going to break down. But the system for dealing with it is, well, it's incredibly efficient and totally unsentimental. If a robot can be fixed, it gets fixed. If not, it becomes an organ donor. You know, a unit with a fried circuit board might still have perfectly good legs, and those parts get harvested to keep the rest of the fleet running. And then, we get to the moment where everything changes. The swarm doesn't just repair itself anymore, it begins to replicate. Using the very iron it's mining from the asteroid, it starts manufacturing brand new units, raw, rugged, and built entirely from the materials of their new home. They become what one source called true children of the asteroid belt.
Now, once that self-replication kicks in, the growth just goes parabolic. It's exponential. They start with 10,000 units. 6 months later, it's 20,000. A year in, you've got 40,000. After 18 months, you're looking at 80,000 bots. This isn't just a mining operation anymore. It's a self-sustaining machine civilization, and it's getting bigger and stronger every single day.
That constant stream of wealth arriving from the mass driver starts to have this profound effect back on Earth. It transforms not just our economy, but our entire relationship with technology and resources. And this brings us to the final chapter, rewriting humanity's future.
All of a sudden, the whole idea of scarcity for these materials just vanishes. The price of precious metals crashes. The cost of everything from our electronics to our buildings plummets. We go from a world of scarcity to a world of unbelievable abundance. We stop hoarding gold in vaults and we actually start building things with it. And Psyche itself, it becomes the logistical hub, the deep space gas station for exploring the rest of the solar system.
You know, this might all sound like something out of a sci-fi novel, but the technology is being developed as we speak, and the asteroid is out there waiting. The biggest gold rush in history is about to begin, and that leaves us with a really crucial question for our own future. Should humans continue to break their backs doing dangerous, difficult work in the dark? Or is it finally time to let the machines carry the weight?